Do you remember Singin' in the Rain? Of course you do, but what if I told you the most shocking story from that movie wasn't Gene Kelly dancing in the rain? It was the secret bond between Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds. A bond so powerful, so emotional, that Donald admitted something about her years later that Hollywood never wanted you to hear. And once you know what he said, you'll never look at that movie the same way again. Donald O'Connor's story is more than just dazzling footwork and unforgettable comedy. It's a tale of resilience, survival, and a friendship that defined an era. And at the heart of it all was his deep admiration for Debbie Reynolds. If you've followed Hollywood over the years, stay until the end. You'll be amazed by a secret from back then. Imagine being born into a world where the stage isn't just a dream, it's your destiny. Donald O'Connor didn't have a choice. From the very first breath he took in 1925 Chicago, he was surrounded by the bright lights and heavy shadows of vaudeville. His parents were performers who lived on the road, dragging little Donald along from one stage to the next. Most kids grew up with playgrounds. Donald grew up with backstage curtains, footlights, and the sound of applause. But what nobody saw behind that curtain was tragedy. Heartbreak struck the O'Connor family again and again. Several of Donald's siblings died young, lives stolen before they had even begun. Can you imagine that? A childhood where funerals were just as common as birthdays. That kind of loss could have crushed anyone. But for Donald, it carved out something different. Resilience, an iron will, a spark of energy so unstoppable that it later became the very thing audiences adored about him. By the time he could walk, he was dancing. By the time he could talk, he was telling jokes. Performance wasn't just a career, it was survival. And survival was something Donald O'Connor knew better than most. Hollywood in the 1930s and 40s was a factory of dreams. But for most child actors, it was also a factory of broken lives. We all know the stories. Young stars pushed too hard, burned out, discarded when they grew up. But Donald O'Connor was different. He didn't just survive Hollywood, he thrived. At just 11 years old, he made his first appearance on the big screen. Picture that for a moment. Most kids his age were still playing marbles in the street. Donald was already facing hot camera lights, reciting lines, and trying to win over an audience. And the wildest part, he actually did it. By his teens, Donald had become one of Universal Studios' most dependable stars. Casting directors loved him because he could do it all. Sing, dance, joke, and charm audiences without missing a beat. He wasn't the brooding type like James Dean. He wasn't the suave heartthrob like Cary Grant. He was something else, something America needed in those years of depression and war. He was light, laughter, and pure energy, bottled up in a boyish grin. He became the sidekick everyone adored, starring alongside legends like Bing Crosby and Peggy Ryan. But that wasn't enough. Donald O'Connor wasn't content to play second fiddle. He was ambitious. He wanted to lead, and he had the talent to do it. Little by little, he built a reputation that Hollywood couldn't ignore. His quick-footed dance style, his natural comedic timing, and his ability to flip from goofy clown to charming lead man, it all added up. Audiences didn't just like him, they trusted him. When Donald O'Connor's name was on a poster, people bought tickets. But what nobody knew at the time was this. His biggest moment, the one that would make him a legend, was waiting just around the corner. And it involved a film so groundbreaking, so iconic, that it would forever change how the world saw musicals and how Donald O'Connor saw Debbie Reynolds. 1952, Hollywood was at its peak. The golden age of musicals was in full swing, and MGM had a secret weapon ready to explode onto the silver screen, Singin' in the Rain. Now, everybody talks about Gene Kelly when this film comes up. His rain-soaked number is legendary, but ask anyone who truly knows Hollywood, and they'll tell you the heart, the humor, the soul of that movie was Donald O'Connor. When Donald performed Make 'em Laugh, he wasn't just dancing, he was defying gravity. He was flipping off walls, throwing himself to the floor, contorting his body in ways that would send most men straight to the hospital. The audience saw comedy, but what they didn't see was the price. Donald was working himself to the bone, literally collapsing at the end of filming. He pushed so hard that he ended up bedridden for days, his body refusing to move after giving the performance of his life. And yet, the scene became one of the most iconic in movie history. It was lightning in a bottle. But here's the twist. The movie wasn't just about dazzling choreography and catchy songs. Behind the scenes, something deeper was happening. Something most people didn't see. Because standing right there with Donald, caught in the whirlwind of pressure and exhaustion, was a young actress who had no idea what she was about to walk into, Debbie Reynolds. Later in this video, I'll reveal a Hollywood secret that even longtime fans have never heard. Make sure you stick around. Here's the scandalous truth. Debbie Reynolds had no dance training, none. MGM threw her into the lion's den. One day she was a teenager from Texas. The next, she was standing between Gene Kelly, the perfectionist, the taskmaster, and Donald O'Connor, the human hurricane. Hollywood insiders whispered that she would crack, that she would fail. Gene Kelly, infamous for his brutal standards, wasn't about to go easy on her. The pressure was suffocating. Imagine being barely 19 years old, having to dance toe-to-toe with two of the greatest performers of all time, with the entire studio and the world watching. Donald later revealed just how brutal it really was. Debbie would rehearse until her feet bled. She cried under the piano in the rehearsal hall from sheer exhaustion. Her body wasn't ready for it, but she refused to give up. He said she worked herself to exhaustion just to keep up with Gene and me. I respected her so much for that. And this is where Donald's feelings became crystal clear. He didn't just see a co-star, he saw a fighter. A young woman who could have been crushed by Hollywood's cruel machine, but instead she rose to the challenge. What makes it even more gripping? Behind the glamour, the reality was brutal. Debbie was treated like an outsider, like a kid who didn't belong in the club of Hollywood royalty. But Donald? He saw something different. He saw grit. He saw resilience. He saw the kind of spirit that would carry her through not only this film, but through a lifetime of personal heartbreaks and triumphs. And that's when the spark began, the bond that would tie Donald O'Connor and Debbie Reynolds together for decades. A bond born not out of romance, but out of respect, admiration, and something even more rare in Hollywood, genuine friendship. When the camera stopped rolling and the lights went dark, most co-stars went their separate ways, but not Donald and Debbie. For him, Debbie wasn't just another actress who happened to share the screen. She was unforgettable. Donald would talk about her for the rest of his life. Decades later, in interviews, his voice still softened when her name came up. He once admitted she was one of the hardest working women I ever met. And this wasn't Hollywood fluff or rehearsed press talk. He meant it. Donald had watched her transform herself on the set of Singin' in the Rain, a young girl with no dance training, forced to compete against giants. She could have quit, she could have broken, but she didn't. And Donald never forgot that. He told stories of how she stayed in rehearsals long after everyone else had gone home, drilling herself into exhaustion, desperate to get every step right. Gene Kelly, notorious for his sharp tongue and perfectionist standards, pushed her hard. Too hard, many said. And yet Debbie never let herself crumble in front of the cameras. She kept smiling, kept pushing, kept fighting. Donald, who knew the toll Hollywood could take, respected her for it more than words could capture, but it wasn't just admiration for her talent or grit, it was her spirit. Donald remembered Debbie as delightful. He said she was funny, quick with a joke, and had this spark that made people instantly love her. She wasn't fake, she wasn't playing a role. Even under the crushing pressure of MGM's studio system, she somehow held on to her humanity. In a world where so many stars wore masks, Debbie Reynolds was real. For Donald, that realness was magnetic. She wasn't just his co-star, she was his friend. And in Hollywood, where friendships are often shallow and fleeting, that bond meant everything. And here's the part that will stop you in your tracks. Donald's feelings for Debbie never faded. Long after Singin' in the Rain was gone from theaters, long after Hollywood musicals were declared dead, Debbie Reynolds never left his heart. He didn't just see her as a co-star, he saw her as family. In fact, Donald once admitted, "Debbie was like family to me." We shared a bond that only people who've been through the trenches of show business can really understand. That word, trenches, says it all, because Hollywood wasn't all glitter and champagne. It was brutal. It chewed stars up, it spat them out, and it left scars most people never saw. But Donald and Debbie had survived it together. And that built a connection no contract, no spotlight, no scandal could ever break. Donald watched her endure storms that would have destroyed almost anyone else. The humiliation of Eddie Fisher, walking out on her for Elizabeth Taylor. The betrayal splashed across every headline in America. The crushing weight of raising children in the spotlight. And through it all, when the world expected her to crumble, Debbie did the unthinkable. She smiled, she laughed, she kept going. Donald once said with quiet admiration, "She went through so much, and yet she always managed to smile. That takes real strength." And here's where the story turns. Because these weren't casual compliments. These were confessions. Words soaked with a tenderness Donald rarely showed about anyone else. His respect for Debbie was deeper than admiration. It was protective, almost brotherly, and yet filled with awe. And then came the line that silenced everyone who heard it. In his final years, while Donald himself was fighting illness, he said simply, "There'll never be another Debbie Reynolds." Not a throwaway line, not Hollywood flattery. It was a tribute, a man looking back on a lifetime of fame, heartbreak, and survival, choosing to honor the one co-star who left an imprint on his soul. And that's why this bond matters, because it wasn't a Hollywood romance, it wasn't scripted, it was real. And in a town built on illusions, maybe that's why, decades later, it still gives us chills. Donald O'Connor's story reminds us that behind every dazzling routine, behind every carefully choreographed scene, there's something far more powerful: human connection. For Donald, Debbie Reynolds wasn't just a co-star. She was proof that strength, resilience, and kindness can shine brighter than the biggest spotlight. And maybe that's why, even decades later, their bond still feels so unforgettable. He made us laugh, she made us believe. Together they made history. And now, you know the truth Donald O'Connor carried with him until the very end.